Good evening, all. Please remain standing whilst my chaplain says a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand in front of you as the man. The Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, to release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who grieve, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendour. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Whether we have watched the tractors on the way in, or whether we have found ourselves stirred by a change of heart in Syria, the rebuilding of the ancient ruins seems to be something that all of us of goodwill are called to. Let me say a short prayer. Heavenly Father, for this council, for wisdom, for their decisions, for discernment, for the course of direction of this Borough Council, and for every person who has offered for public service, we give you thanks. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop, and congratulations. I am sure all of us will join in and say, very well done.
Thank you.
Yes. And now, will you please stay standing, because my denominational member is going to say a few words. Ajit Saluja.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ajit, and I'm here representing Sikh Society of Basingstoke. With humility and devotion, we invoke the blessings of Waheguru Ji, the eternal light and guide, upon this esteemed council. May the wisdom of Guru Nanak Dev Ji inspire you to seek truth, justice, and harmony in all your decisions. May Guru Gobind Singh Ji give you courage and clarity to act with integrity and fairness. We pray for peace, unity, and understanding to prevail, and for all voices to be heard and respect and compassion. May your efforts serve the greater good and uplift humanity, fostering a world of equality and love. May the divine light of Waheguru Ji guide your minds and actions, bringing prosperity and harmony to all. Sarbat da bhala, as we say, which means may there be blessings and well-being for all. Waheguru Ji bless you in this noble service. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ajit, and please be seated. Right, will we have the members here? Back, please. So, members, please ensure you have signed in with your voting cards. The first item of business on the agenda tonight is apologies for absence, and I have one, which is Councillor Grassi. Any further, Councillor Harvey? Councillor James? No. Councillor Minnesbaum?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor McIntyre and Councillor Mamaneleni.
Noted. Councillor Ibrahim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Jones and Councillor West.
Thank you. Those are noted. Now we come to declaration of interest. Are there any declaration of interest? None. Come to item 3, which is the minutes of meeting held on 17th of October 2024. I will move the minutes of correct record. Is there a seconder?
I'm happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Are the minutes agreed? Thank you. I will sign the minutes. So I come to the item 4. This is for the office of mayor and deputy mayor for the year. We will now move to the office of mayor and deputy mayor for the year 2025-26. Councillor Colin Phillimore is invited to stand, mayor, and Councillor Jackie Thurstein is willing to take up the role of deputy mayor. Is that agreed? Agreed. Yep, is great. So now I come to announcement. I would like to say that councillors and officers, I thank you for your hard work throughout the year. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a happy, prosperous, and healthy New Year, including the visitors that we have. Question from members of the public, I have none. Petitions, I have none. Now, I come to resignation and appointments. I see that, are there any changes to committee seat? There is one, Councillor Ibrahim.
Yes, I would like to nominate Councillor Sajish Term to sit on the trustee of Basingstoke Charities.
No, the first one about Councillor Tom.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, nominating him to sit on the Basingstoke Charities.
Fine, yeah, that's done, yeah. Is that agreed? So are there any other nomination to fill vacancies on the outside bodies listed? No. Councillor Ban? No. Councillor Ibrahim? No. And Councillor James? No. So, have got the visitors for no. So now we come to item 9. So capital monitoring report as at 30th of September 2024. Councillor James will propose. Do we have a seconder? Yes, Councillor. So Councillor James, would you like to introduce the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the Capital Monitoring Report. We're halfway through the year. You'll see there is a variance, as there always seems to be, in terms of an underspend of £6 million. As always, it's not necessarily an underspend, it's a delayed spend. The two significant items that sit within the Capital Monitoring Report in terms of those underspends, one is related to the changes to May Place. As you'll be aware, County Council were reviewing their funding of homelessness services, and obviously we didn't want to build something that we couldn't then sustain and maintain. So there was a delay in progressing that scheme whilst we waited for the County Council to make a decision. Unfortunately, they made a decision but for 1 year only, which is really helpful. So that scheme's been delayed quite deliberately. The other considerable scheme in there is around Manydown and the infrastructure loan, the first instalment of that loan. And you'll see when you look at the vehemence that we're requesting, recommended to Council tonight, there's been a change in the way that that loan is going to be structured. Originally, there was a £25 million loan over a number of years for infrastructure. That's now coming from Homes England, and we're funding a slightly different loan, a B loan to the LDV, to get them up, sort of started up. And so it's a slightly smaller loan. So there's two requests for Council to approve tonight. One relates to that, the Manydown loan, and changing the name of that loan effectively. It's still going to be the same process. We're lending money and we're going to get that money back, but it has to sit within the capital programme. There is another minor amendment as well, and that relates to the MALS funding. Originally, it was MALS improvement funding. We've recognised to improve the MALS, you sometimes have to improve the area around the MALS. So we just want to change the name of that to the town centre more generally, to allow us to do a couple of schemes that have come up, which we'd like to get because it improves the overall town centre. So that's the recommendation for those two changes to be made. Thank you.
Councillor.
I need to ask Councillor Harvey if he wants to speak.
Yeah. Councillor Harvey, would you like to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So Councillor Isaac.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and Merry Christmas. And Merry Christmas to the portfolio holder. I think my question may have been overtaken by announcements, and this might be more relevant to a future mayor, but I'll ask it anyway. It relates to the capital programme and the extent to which, because of the planned expenditure on capital over the next 4 years, we are going to reduce our capital total resources from 146 million down to just over 12 million, which is a considerable reduction, as everyone will realise, in terms of how much capital this organisation holds. It may be well spent, we shall see. But what I wanted to ask the portfolio holder through you, Mr. Mayor, is does he have any idea of what our capital resources are going to look like beyond 2028? If he hasn't got that answer tonight, then perhaps I think it'd be something, it's not too soon for him perhaps to give that answer to us all as councillors, because I think it's something that should be of genuine interest to councillors.
Okay. Now I come to Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick question, page 42, 43. What's the difference between a delayed spend and a rephased spend?
Any other speakers? No. Councillor Harvey, would you like to speak? No. Thank you. Now I will open this item for debate.
No, you've done that. So you're asking whether you're asking Councillor James
Councillor
to sum up.
Can I ask Councillor James to sum up, please?
Yes, in summing up, I'll just answer Councillor Isaac's questions as best I can. The overall capital available spend of the 146 million, obviously based on forecasting. One of the things that inflates that spend was because of the original plan to loan £25 million to the Manydown setup and the infrastructure. That was taken out of our treasury management, added to our capital resources, so it could be loaned out, then repaid, and then taken out again. So it actually looks like that 25 million gets double counted, which is very annoying. So actually our resources weren't as high as that. They were £25 million lower. Our leftover resources will be £25 million higher because that'll be subbed out again. That will all change when we do the final year, and you'll see the capital budget next year change because that money's coming out of that. But the replacement of the aquadrome is going to deplete our capital, available capital expenditure considerably, down to a very low figure indeed. That's one of the reasons why in our revenue budgets we are looking to increase what we put into capital in order to make sure we can carry on sustaining ourselves, because we can't just rely on SIL money to do the stuff we want to do. So that kind of explains that. In terms of a phased spend versus a delayed spend, that's a very good question, and one that our 151 officer will provide an answer to, because I suggest he probably got very bored of repeating himself and used a different phrase.
Are the recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So we move to the next item. Council tax discretionary and council tax support scheme 2025 and 26. I would like to propose a council tax discretionary discount and the council tax support scheme. Do we have a seconder?
Delighted to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I will now open this item for debate. Would anyone like to speak? I see none. Is that agreed? Yep. So the recommendation is carried. Now we come to the notice of motion at family farm tax. Councillor Minnesbaum, would you please propose your motion? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Before the clock starts, I think we've got some alterations that we can hand out so everybody can get the bits of paper whilst I introduce it, if that's all right with the Democratic Services team. So, if I may, Mr Mayor, tonight I introduce a motion that speaks to the heart of who we are as a borough. A community deeply connected to its rural roots, its countryside, and the hard-working family farmers who sustain it. Family farms in Basingstoke and Deane are not just businesses, they are custodians of our landscapes, protectors of our biodiversity, and providers of the food that we eat and that is on our tables. Yet they face growing challenges. The recently announced family farm tax threatens their very survival by increasing financial burdens and making it harder for them to plan and pass down their land to future generations. These farms are vital for food security, environmental stewardship, economic support, and our rural communities' heritage. Over the past few weeks, I've had many conversations with farmers in the borough that have spoken about the pride they feel in their work and their frustration. Despair that these changes are bringing. One farmer said to me, "We've looked after this land for generations, and now we feel like we're being punished for it." Another shared the weight of trying to make ends meet while still meeting the high expectations that we place on them. They said, "We work to feed people, protect the environment, and support the rural economy, but it feels like no one sees the sacrifices that we make." Farmers cannot do this alone. They were talking and doing many of these things that we have only recently started talking about in this council. They need us to stand with them, just as they work tirelessly for us. This motion calls on the council to formally oppose the family farm tax and urge the government to reconsider this damaging policy. It is our responsibility to ensure the survival of family farms, not only for today, but for generations to come. I ask you to vote in favour of this motion, not to protect just the farmers who protect so much for us, but really for everything and to protect everything that makes our borough special. The alterations that I believe you now have in front of you are about the sections that this council resolves. The first one is to add the Chancellor of the Exchequer to the list of people to write to. The other one is the third bullet, and the alteration is that this council resolves to request Cabinet in the next 12 months to develop a rural strategy that aims to achieve inclusive, sustainable rural communities, where everyone has the opportunity to participate and access the services and facilities that they need, an environmentally and economically sound rural borough where the needs of farming, conservation and the development are appropriately balanced. We will need that more than ever with the new government's housing targets. Where residents feel supported to take ownership and drive improvements in their own communities, and ensure our rural communities can be safe and welcoming for residents, visitors and for businesses. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wu, do you wish to second this and speak now, or do you wish to reserve the right to speak to the motion at a later stage?
I'd like to speak now, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The government's decision to impose inheritance tax on family farms came as a shock to every farming family in the country. I've talked to local farmers in our borough. The message from them and from my many farming relatives are consistent. The government does not understand how farming works and does not understand the consequences of imposing this tax in such short timescales. This tax is expected to raise about £500 million a year. That's a lot of money to take out of farming. It's not a lot of money in the context of government spending. The NHS, for example, requires about £200 million per day. So for 2.5 days of NHS spending, we potentially destroy so many farms, the families and workers who depend on them, and their contribution to our rural economy and communities, which frankly is priceless. Mr. Mayor, the purpose of exempting farmers from inheritance tax was to keep food prices low and to protect our country's food security. We've all seen what has happened during the war in Ukraine. In 2021, Ukraine was the world's 5th largest wheat producer. We all experienced what happened when Russia invaded. Our food prices dramatically increased. We must protect our local production of food, and that means supporting our farmers. Let me be clear, farmers are prepared to pay their fair share of our tax burden. Indeed, they are already paying higher taxes on a range of other measures. However, increasing their tax burden must be in ways and in timescales which farming can manage sustainably. In our world, everything seems to be instant. We can access information in seconds on our smartphones. We can order takeaway food and groceries delivered to our door in a matter of minutes. Farming is not like this. Farming in our climate requires long-term planning. It's unusual to have more than one crop from a field in 1 year. They prepare the land, pay for seed, invest in planting the seed, fertilizing the plants, spraying it for pests and diseases. If the climate is good to them, they harvest the crop, then find a buyer for it, who then doesn't pay them straight away. They've had to wait months, if not a year or more, to get a return on their investment. It's a very risky way of earning a living. Farmers also rotate their crops to reduce the risks of pests and maintain the quality of the soil. For my brother-in-law, this is a 6-year cycle. Some crops he knows he may lose money on, but it enhances the yields of other crops, which are more profitable. Over that 6-year cycle, he looks after the soil, the drainage, the hedgerows. He is a custodian for future years and future generations. We are told an easy solution is for parents to gift their land and assets to their children. If the parents live for 7 years, the children avoid inheritance tax. This is oversimplifying the reality on the ground. I have yet to meet a family farmer who has invested in a pension. Why would they? Their pension is their land, their farm machinery, the farm buildings. They invest all spare cash into their farms to increase production and protect our environment. The next generation take over the farm and pay their parents an income as long as they need it. That's their pension. If the parents gift the land to the next generation, they are not permitted to take an income from it. The farmhouse would not be theirs to live in. They would have to pay rent on it or bring down the wrath of HMRC upon them. This is not a realistic solution. Farmers can and will contribute more tax to our economy, but they must be consulted on the best mechanisms to do that, so they have time to adjust their business models and structures to ensure they are sustainable. Farmers protecting their businesses protects our rural communities and economies, protects our green countryside and our food supplies. I urge you to support this motion and support our farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we will move to debate. I got Councillor Ganesh.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Merry Christmas. Even though I was born into a generations of farmers family back in Sri Lanka, I must declare I no longer farming, but as a ward councillor, represent rural communities and their families and farmers around the borough and around the country. I think we all have the responsibility to make sure that we do have a safe space for farmers to continue doing what they're doing. Because this government's position on family farm tax will not only damage the farmers, but will also have serious consequences on food security, local communities, rural economies, as well as the entire country, pretty much everyone, because we all need food for living. This farmer harming Keir Starmer and cabinet full of sleazy Labour politicians can try to dupe us all into believing they took a difficult but necessary decision to restore economic stability and fix this 20 billion tax or 20 million black hole. It exists at the moment. But if you look into the detail, the Transport Secretary, who was a convicted criminal who gave billions to trade unions without Treasury approvals, and Climate Secretary, who is proposing 22 billion to splash around carbon capture schemes, which he couldn't even specify who's going to be the beneficiaries. But in reality, this harming the farmers' tactics won't help in any way to fix this government's incompetence. These are tried, tested, and failed methods by socialist governments around the world. Because I can certainly talk about it because I was born in one of those. 40 plus years ago, I was born in northern Sri Lanka in a farmhouse surrounded by paddy fields and coconut plantations. The government at that time, the Marxist government at that time, they introduced a bill called Land Reform Tax Act, which took away the farming land from the farming community and destroyed the entire economy, which led the country bankrupting in few years' time. The country has gone downhill since then, never recovered until now. So this is a failed model by this incompetent government. What they're trying to do without a basic economic acumen. I'm not sure Chancellor Right Honourable Rachel from complaints understand the consequences of compromising on food security or wider economic picture. It's about time she start consulting with real economists. So my fellow councillors, please do take all these facts into account. These are tried, tested, failed method all around the world. This is definitely not going to benefit anyone in Britain, not just farmers, every single person in this country. So I urge you to support this motion so we can do whatever we can within the borough as a council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, a point of order. In the spirit of debate, not hate, may I ask members to be very careful with their language? Going a little too far, making a very strong point, is reasonable. Saying the things that have been said in the last speech perhaps take us way too far. May I invite you, Mr. Mayor, debate, not hate.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Harvey, but it is for me really to see whether I should take it or really say anything. But there is one thing that I'd like to bring to you, all of you. I have got 20 minutes, and I'd like you to keep it quite concise because I got too many speakers already on my list here. So if everybody will speak, please keep it quite concise and to the point. And we can then get, everybody will get the opportunity to speak. Okay. So, Councillor Hussey, I said what I said, and I am happy with what I heard. If there was something there that shouldn't have been said to the chamber, then it is a responsibility of the councillor, and then that's where it goes. But I am happy with whatever. So I want to move on because I haven't got much time. So Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, in the spirit of togetherness and Christmas, can I congratulate the Conservatives on bringing this motion? It's hard to believe just a few years ago they were the party that promised to replace the EU cap for farmers and then didn't. They were the same Conservatives who said they'd get rid of red tape to make exporting farming goods easier and then made it harder. And they were the same Conservatives who said they would not do trade deals that would allow substandard food to come into the country and then did the opposite. So I welcome their start to return to normality. We're all Remainers now. Now, I then want to deal with the policy itself. It was, I think, a bad policy by the Labour government. And we know it's a bad policy because a couple of people have told us. One was Keir Starmer, who announced that the policy wouldn't affect many people or raise much money. And the second one was the farming minister, who said, with good planning, it's easily avoided. So I'm not quite sure how much of that black hole is going to be filled by a policy that affects very few people who can easily avoid it. But there we go. In my view, it is a shameful policy. It was a much easier policy you could have done instead. They could have changed the rules to capital gains tax, that any business, whether that's farming or not, that transfers from one member of family to another member of family is transferred at zero value and not subject to inheritance tax. If it's then subsequently sold, of course the entire amount it's sold for would be subject to capital gains tax, and that would mean the likes of the Dysons and the Clarksons, who have no long-term commitment to farming, would actually have to pay more tax than under the Rachel Reeves scheme. At the same time, genuine family farms could pass from generation to generation without being torn apart and left in a mess and basically reduced, because they won't become viable if you keep taking 20% off a farm every time it goes from one generation to the next. So there was an easy alternative to the policy that's been outlined. So I was going to moan about some of the recommendations within the policy, but I'm not going to, because they've been greatly improved. The original item 3 I couldn't support. I still have problems with number 2, to request the council administration to engage with local farmers and community representatives on what support the council can provide them, because number 3 now sort of supersedes number 2, because it says let's go and have a look at what we can do in a proper investigation. Number 3 itself does seem to miss the point that we've recently gone through a lot of this in terms of drafting our local plan and looking at sustainable communities. So a lot of this is policies that we're already working on and we're already doing. But certainly I have no problem with us supporting this motion to then look at whatever gaps may exist and what other support can be offered. So number two, certainly I will say that, and I appreciate it's something that's changed in recent years, as an administration we like to engage with all businesses and all communities about anything and everything. We're a listening council, so a lot of that is something we would do as part of our day job. I appreciate it's changed from your time, but that's where we are right now. So I can support the motion, but I think there's a lot of work that's already been done to support this already. So I'll support it, and we'll take it away and see what can be done, and I'm sure a relevant committee will do some more deeper diving. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cubitt.
Hello, good evening and happy Christmas to everybody. I too, both my family, my husband's family, we're all farmers in the past, and I agree it's an invidious and iniquitous tax. I don't have a problem with us asking the leader to submit a letter to the relevant parties in Westminster. However, it is a Westminster tax instigated by Westminster, and therefore there's very little, in truth, that we as a borough can do in relation to this tax. I suggest that those that are upset about it write and tell their respective elected members of Parliament, and that, truthfully, is the best way to deal with this iniquitous, invidious tax. However, in relation to the very last-minute amendment that we've received, which is different to that which we've received before, I note that to a very great degree we're already doing a large part of this, not least because of Councillor Vokes's policy that she wrote in 2022 called Strengthening Communities, and the outcomes that she requested of the council to ensure that they were doing. So it's already embedded within what our officers are doing, and these words mirror the words that we as a full chamber approved in that policy, Sustainable Communities 2022-2027. I'd also like to highlight that under the amendment of the local plan update, we are absolutely, wherever possible, emphasising the support to the rural community, which is incredibly important to many of us in this chamber. I, for one, have received emails from parish councils today stating their opposition to this tax and requesting that we support this motion. However, I would also like to state that since we came into administration, coalition administration, we have initiated the Shopfront Grant, which is applied to our rural communities as much as to Basingstoke, that has been popular. We've ensured that money's been put into improving toilet facilities in the rural towns and villages around. We have provided more money and support for playgrounds in the rural communities. And we have provided more money towards litter picking in the rural communities. And one of the other very successful things that we did since we took over administration was to support the community facility in Kingsclear, which was very popular with the Kingsclear community. So we as a local administration are committed not only to the urban but also to the rural. Both are equally important. That is the very essence of our borough, and that's why our borough is called Basingstoke and Deane, the largest urban conurbation and the smallest village. And steadfast in service, we will support all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. During the election, Steve Reid, now the Environment Secretary, pledged that Labour had no intention of changing agricultural property relief. And yet, at the first opportunity, Labour reneged on that promise. And they've slammed Britain's growers and producers with a devastating tax that will cripple our family farmers. I'm afraid the Labour government fails to understand the basic economics of agriculture. Family farmers, like those I represent in Evan Gar Ward, might have land and assets,
built up over generations, but they are cash poor. The equipment they need to buy is expensive to maintain. It is expensive to buy in the first place, and yet the margins in farming are incredibly tight. And if you look at real salaries at the end of each year, they're often the minimum wage, they're often quite similar to the national average wage or lower. Labour claim to be the party of working people. We hear the Prime Minister saying so often he's in the service of working people. And yet they seem to have zero sympathy for the hardest working people in our country, the men and women who grow our food. The farm tax has fallen like a hammer blow on these families, who now face an enormously uncertain future full of terrible choices. Now, it's estimated that the tax will affect more than 70,000 farmers, with the average farming family left with a tax bill of at least £240,000. And for many, this will mean that profit is impossible, leaving them no choice but to sell land or to close entirely. And the farms that will be forced to be sold will end up in corporate ownership, in the hands of major agribusinesses and major asset management companies. And I suppose I have to ask the Labour Party, which claims to be the party of working people, that claims to want to hold to account big capital, do Labour truly want to punish working people and empower asset managers and big grocery companies? Is that the outcome that they seek? I'm afraid the consequences of this policy for our country's food security and our national food independence, as pointed out by my colleague Councillor Vox, are truly concerning. And we also know that family farmers who have a generational link to their land, to their communities, care most about food standards and food quality. We know they do most for nature recovery and biodiversity and sustainable land management. And everyone who walks in our beautiful borough's countryside has cause to thank our family farmers. And more than this, family farmers are essential to the basic functioning of our rural communities. When St Maryborn was trapped in the snow during the Beast from the East, it was family farmers who opened the roads. And recently, in the storms in Highclere, it was family farmers who helped the County Council clear the A343 of trees. Now, Keir Starmer was right in 2023 when he told the National Farmers Union that when a family farm is gone, it is gone, and that therefore it is fundamentally different from most businesses. And of course, now he's achieved power, he seems to have forgotten that wisdom. So I call on this council to join local authorities in what is effectively a town hall rebellion of sorts. From Suffolk to Staffordshire, from Cornwall to Cambridgeshire, local councils are voting on similar motions as these to encourage the
You can stand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, you did say that you wanted to keep the speeches to a minimum.
Yeah.
He seems to be dragging this on as if he's trying to talk.
That's not a point of order, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a final closing comment, actually. So I call on this council to reject Labour's farm tax and to work with us on a strategy and a task force on a cross-party basis to support our rural communities and our local agricultural sector.
I'll come next to Councillor McCormick to be brief because I've only got 4 minutes. 4 minutes of debate remaining.
Point of order, you cannot say that. We've just listened to 10 minutes of absolute sanctimonious rubbish, and you now tell us to be brief.
Councillor Watts, I did mention
Mr. Mayor, with all due respect,
to be brief so that there is only 20 minutes of debate. So
then
I
we
am
should have
keeping
10
to the
minutes.
20 minutes, and I don't want any discussion on that.
with all due respect, it's been very one-sided so far. This is the first opportunity for anyone to speak against this motion. Now, my cousin was a farmer on the Isle of Wight. whenever I see Caleb Cooper on TV, I think of him. He got out of farming years ago. He got out of farming because there was no money in it, and it was really hard to buy farms. Farms are really expensive. He went into a landscape gardening business and did a lot better at that. These inheritance tax proposals are aimed at stopping land banking and closing a notorious tax loophole. Only the super rich need fear inheritance tax on farms, and that information I got from the London School of Economics, who's looked at these proposals in detail. Most farms are tenanted. Tenant farmers don't own the farms they work on. If you own a farm, there are two easy ways to avoid paying inheritance tax. One is to make a family trust of it, which people obviously seem to think is too hard. Don't know why. You have to live for 7 years and there won't be a tax liability. The other is to form a limited company, be liable for income tax on dividends or rental income. The tax loophole actually hurts tenanted farmers by driving up rents and land prices, making it harder for new farmers to buy farms in the first place. And I have to say, I've rarely seen a motion so riddled with inaccuracies. Breaking a promise not to introduce a family farm tax. Nothing was mentioned in the manifesto. But to say nothing about anything does not commit a party to a course of action. How can it? Otherwise, you would have committed in 2010 to no austerity. We all know what happened there. Indeed, there was nothing in the election literature of the proposer and secretary about this motion. Did he promise not to raise it? It's absurd. Food security. I think that's a really exaggerated threat that you've had there. I don't see any evidence for it. It's an assertion. I really find it hard to find a basis on it. Much of our food and raw ingredients that we get are imported and has been for over a century. Brexit has had a much greater impact on our food security than inheritance tax ever will. As we import a lot of our food from the EU, and farmers have lost more in EU subsidies than they ever will through inheritance tax. Austerity policies by the last government had an even greater impact on food security for millions of people forced into poverty using food banks. And our biggest threat to food security was the Second World War. How do we mitigate that risk? With allotments, my granddad had one, and by nationalising farms and forming the Land Army. There's point 5 says make British food production harder. How? In what way is inheritance tax on farms going to affect our food processing plants, our supermarkets, our fisheries, our bakeries, our breweries, our distilleries? Point 7 mentions countless farms. 500 out of over 200,000 farms nationwide are expected to be affected. At 0.25%. The people that are going to be affected are people like James Dyson, who owns 50 farms worth £500 million and who could potentially be liable for 120 million. Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCormick, it's time. Now, I would take a decision of extending it for maximum of 5 minutes, and I would give 2 speakers to speak. And one I'm going to really ask is Councillor Miller, and the next one will be Councillor Lee. So please keep it brief because both of you have got only 5 minutes. So Councillor Lee, okay?
Mr. Mayor, point of order, please. I would like to make a motion without notice, section L, I believe it is, to suspend a particular council procedure rule, and I would like to suspend the 20-minute thing because giving us 5 minutes is unacceptable. There are lots of people still wanting to speak, and I would like to make a point of order that we move a motion to suspend that particular rule and we debate until we are all satisfied. Fiona, if you're struggling, it's 15L to suspend 14.4A.
Please bear with me. Right.
Explain it has to be half have to vote for it.
Yeah. At least half have to vote for what's been proposed. All I'm going to now do is Councillor Howard Searle has put in about what we should really do, and I'll be asking for a vote. So can I call for a vote, please?
Suspend.
To suspend the rule and to continue the debate to the full. So can I have a show of hands, please? That's carried, so I am going to continue with a list of people who have to talk. So I come to...
You're going to have to continue where you were.
Yeah. To Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So tonight we are debating a motion that paints a dramatic and misleading picture of the government's inheritance tax reforms. It claims that these changes will devastate family farms, threaten food security and force the sale of land. But these claims simply don't stand up to scrutiny, and I urge you to reject this motion. And here's why. The term family farm tax is nothing more than fear-mongering. Nationally, there are around 209,000 farms, of which only 500 are expected to be affected annually. Only 500 a year, yeah. Yeah, only 500 a year expected to be affected annually, a year. This makes the proportion of farms impacted at less than 0.5%. With an estimated 317 farms in our local authority, according to House of Commons Library research, this reality points to less than 1% of farms in our local authority being affected by these changes of the law. Most family farms won't pay a penny more in tax thanks to the generous reliefs that remain in place. A married couple can pass up to £3 million in assets tax-free under the laws. This includes £2 million in agricultural property relief, £650,000 from the standard inheritance tax threshold, and £350,000 from the residential nil rate band, if the family home is included. For the vast majority of farms, these exemptions will cover the entire estate, ensuring that they can pass on to the next generation without any tax burden. Now, as already been mentioned, there is also the 7-year rule, which allows farms or assets gifted during a farmer's lifetime to become completely exempt from inheritance tax if the owner lives for at least 7 years after making the gift. A quick search on the internet shows that actually farmers that gift their estates can become employees and take a wage, and I suggest that Councillor Vogue, you ask your brother-in-law to seek. I ask your brother-in-law to seek maybe some tax guidance, some contractual law.
Please don't address other councillors.
Now let's address the concern about food security. The motion suggests that these reforms will threaten our ability to produce food, but the reality is quite different. Food security in the UK is influenced by global supply chains, trade policies and climate change, not inheritance tax. In fact, these reforms will strengthen food security by ensuring farmland stays in the hands of genuine farmers. Speculative investors have been exploiting the current system using farmland as a tax shelter with no intention of farming it. This drives up land prices, making it harder for real farmers to expand or afford the land that they need. By closing these loopholes, the reforms prioritise productive use of farmland, ensuring it remains accessible to those who work the land and contribute to feeding our communities. Let me also address the claims that struggling farmers will be forced to sell their farms. If a farm is genuinely struggling or unprofitable, its value will likely fall below the tax thresholds, meaning no tax will be due. These changes are designed to stop abuse by wealthy investors, not to punish hard-working farmers. The current system has also created an unfair playing field where large estates can avoid taxes while smaller farms struggle. These reforms level the playing field, ensuring reliefs are reserved for those actively contributing to agriculture. Now, Councillor Carr cited warnings about 70,000 farms being affected, but these figures have been independently verified as flawed. The independent analysis shows the number of active farming families impacted is far smaller because it actually looks at those who have claimed the relevant reliefs. And finally, let's not forget that these reforms are about fairness. The changes target the wealthiest landowners who misuse the system to avoid paying taxes. Meanwhile, genuine farmers who work hard every day to sustain their businesses and feed the nation are protected. This isn't a betrayal of farmers, it's a step towards creating a fairer and more sustainable agricultural sector. Members, these claims in the motion are not grounded in reality. These reforms protect the majority of family farms through generous exemptions, prioritise productive farming, which strengthens food security, and discourage the financialisation of farmland, which has driven up costs and reduced access for genuine farmers. By prioritising active agriculture, the changes support real rural economies and strengthen the long-term sustainability of farming communities. Members, I urge you to vote against this motion and stand up for fairness, sustainability and the long-term success of farming in our community. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First words I wrote down when I prepared this earlier on has all come to fruition. The proposed family farm tax, and I'm assuming that's the official title because everybody's using it, has created many headlines and debates. We've got ones here tonight. But I wish to add to this an example that the current government is issuing intent without a thorough analysis. We've heard one analysis tonight. Don't know where it came from. Then, regarding what is impacted, what's the real amount of money to be raised, and more than that, what would be the unintended consequences? And that's the words I want to use this evening. Family farms are those that have been handed it from generation to generation. We had 9 farmers outside the front of this council building tonight, and with their families. And they were local families in this borough, and they were all impacted by it, would be all impacted by this particular tax. And the families have to plan in multiple timescales, and we heard that from one of the proposers of the motion tonight. As the successors grow up, they acquire an immense amount of knowledge and experience on that farm, but will probably go to the agricultural college in their early 20s, such as Sparshall, just down the road here at Winchester, to gain even more knowledge of modern farming techniques. They are passionate to continue the work and environment of their farm, but if they see that their future on the farm will just to pay off a government tax, they will not channel their passion and enthusiasm into farming. It will be lost. During the 2 years of the mayoral cycle, I had the privilege to be involved with and finishing last year, I was invited to Sparshall 3 times. Why? Young Farmers Award ceremonies. These are the young farmers of Hampshire coming together, and their achievements in their time at college were recognised. I hope the forthcoming mayors being proposed early on this evening will have the opportunity to go down and meet these young people, because they have a passion and enthusiasm. But if they don't see any future,
they won't bother to attend these colleges, and their experience and their enthusiasm will be lost. My main point here is the government does not seem to have a clue what's going on at grassroots, and that goes across many of the announcements that have been made. And it has been bean counters, I call them. I think we all know what that expression is. It would be an easy win in without considering the human and potential food supply consequences of their policy. I ask you to support this, and why do we do it as a council? To have individuals in this council writing up does nothing. If it's got the label of Basingstoke and Dean, it means we are strong in our opposition to this, and it's got to be thought through. It's not due to come into force until the April budget, I believe. I'll be corrected on that. So hopefully there's proper consultation and that this tax isn't imposed immediately but spread over time so that the farmers can plan and stay in supplying us with a decent food supply. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Hello, everybody. Just before I speak, I wanted to say that I've actually lived on a farm for some 40 years, and I know quite a lot about farming, as we've discussed amongst us all before. I was going to write a speech, and then I decided to speak to some farmers I know personally, and I asked them to give me some quotes, so I'm going to read those directly. They're from different farms, arable, livestock, and fruit farms. One farmer said, "They're showing sheer ignorance in understanding farming, countryside, community and stability. Hedgerows, drainage, ditch, importing of food. They have never looked at the farmers' cash flow sheets and obviously want to destroy any UK-grown food upon upping imports and raising food costs. This is not just farmers that will be destroyed, but the many connected businesses showing how little they understand about the businesses and the countryside community." Another one said, "The inheritance tax on family-owned trading businesses and farms in a tax on the very essence of being a farmer. Like it or not, the primary motivation for investing in farm businesses and farms is to provide for one's kin. That is why we invest in the future, in growth, in people we employ and the people we will employ. This is a tax on those motivations for long-term, multi-generational thinking. In short, it is completely daft." Another one said, "Potentially, if my girls take over with nothing in place, they will have to sell 250 acres. I am asset rich, cash poor. I am only as good as my last harvest. I have not sold any of my farm. I'm trying to keep it all together. Farming is difficult, costs are high. It is my passion. I love my dirt." And finally, another person said to me, "Why have a tax which on death will effectively reduce the size of holdings, making less profitable, possibly loss-making? Land sold off to pay tax will likely be sold to a lifestyle buyer who will have no intention of farming or producing food, or sold to a corporate institution that will likely also not produce food, but use the land for some perceived ecological gain. The government cannot think that this tax will not be countered by a lack of spending in the industry, less income tax, and weekend food security. Why not change the IHT on non-farming landowners only? If our main source of income has come from our farm, leave us alone." So I just wanted to say that I got this quote: "Farmers don't just work until the sun goes down. They work until the job gets done." Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy Christmas.
Thank you. That's Councillor Perry's maiden speech. So can you give her a clap, please? Now I come to Councillor Slimming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I would like to say that I am extremely disappointed because when the government changed, I think like many of us, we saw an opportunity to change the way things have been happening. And I'm even sure that some of my colleagues over that side in the Labour Party are probably quite amazed about the reaction of much of the legislation they've been bringing forward. Our last meeting, we debated the change in winter fuel allowance, and this seems to be the same. It seems to be that it's ill thought out. It didn't look at alternatives to be able to deliver what was needed. We all know that the previous government left a huge hole in our finances, and it has to be addressed, and we would all agree that something needs to be done. But this is like driving a combined harvester right through the middle of everything that is in our country. A lot of people here have actually mentioned that they have something to do with farming. I too have a background of farming. My grandfathers, great-grandfathers, and even before them. And my father himself was a farmer, a dairy farmer in Cheshire, where I was brought up. With a work ethic I still have, because we had to work hard. He was a small farmer. He only had 50 acres. He had a pedigree Frisian herd, which was actually renowned across the country. In fact, one of the bulls came to Sherburn St John, and there was a sign on the corner that said this was a Frisian pedigree herd. But we also reared chickens and had eggs. My father grew potatoes that went to the Pent and Firth potatoes, went to the Golden Wonder factory and made into crisps. He planted cereals, wheat, oat, barley, whatever was going to make a profit. And we did not have any money. He was fortunate in the sense that it was a county council farm. So when he actually decided to retire, all his assets that he couldn't spend were put in the bank account and eventually paid for my mother in a care home for 12 years. So all the work that he put in and other people are doing all the time are only actually ever generated for the profits that are there for a very short period of time. We know that the average farmer at the moment, a small farm, does not even earn enough for the hours they put in for the minimum wage. And people have been talking about farmers as if 500 a year is going to be not much of a problem. 8,100 farms last year closed. If that is repeated every year over the next few years, where is our food going to come from? Our milk, our dairy products, our eggs, all come from animals in this country. You don't even have to be a meat eater to appreciate that you eat cheese, you might eat butter, you might have cream, you use eggs. These are things that we generate in this country, as well as fruit trees, and of course, looking after the land with cereals of different types these days. You've got rapeseed oil and all the other things that diversification for farmers. They're also custodians of the countryside. I think we're all concerned about the environment. They are the best custodians of the environment. My father would not allow the hunt to go across his land because he did not believe that foxes should be killed by animals such as dogs. And many other farmers do an awful lot more than they are ever paid for to be able to look after the countryside, because that is their living. I agree that the motion that was put before us initially did not stand ground. However, the amendments probably do. I had the opportunity to speak to the farmers outside this evening, and I did congratulate them on doing what they're doing, and I did wish them every happiness over Christmas, because unlike many of us, they won't be sitting down watching the TV. They will be out looking after their animals. they will be out working all day and all night, every day of the year. My
Councillor
father
Slimming,
never had a holiday.
it's time.
Please support the motion. Thank you.
Now I come to Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I cannot support this motion. It is factually incorrect and it's scaremongering. There's no evidence that the government's changes to inheritance tax for farmers will threaten food security and force the sale of land. The way I see it, the government is closing down a tax loophole, which the very wealthy have exploited for years. Why do my family have to pay 40% inheritance tax on my pension and my estate when I die, and farm landlords don't have to pay any inheritance tax? Even after the changes the government are proposing, it's going to be 20%. And as already been stated, a married couple, farming couple, can pass on up to £3 million in tax-free assets to their family. As already also been stated, there's 317 farms in this borough, and most of them are tenant farms, and will not be affected by these changes. So only a handful will be affected by these changes. And as a borough, why are we debating something in this chamber that only affects a handful of people? I mean, every housing case I get, why we should be debating that? Why is the housing numbers going up in this particular borough? Why every time I get a case, it was 18 months and now it's 2.5 years? Why is child poverty increasing in this borough? Why is pension poverty? Why is the bus services so unreliable? And then we're debating an inheritance tax that's going to affect a handful of people in this borough. This is just beyond me. What has damaged farming in this country is the Brexit deal, which Johnson and Lord Frosty Frost gave us. Was it in tariffs, import duties, massive loads of paperwork and bureaucracy? I mean, it was like self-imposed sanctions on this country, and then we get this motion. Everything that's gone wrong on the Labour government in the last 4 months is due to the Labour government and farming. Absolute nonsense. This is a Westminster issue, and we should be debating things that affect Basingstoke and Dean. And so I will not be supporting this motion. I urge my fellow members to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Ibrahim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just let me start by stating some facts here. The Labour government have introduced reform to an unfair tax system. This is what is it called. It's obviously this unfair system has allowed for wealthy individuals to own so many lands and avoid paying tax like anyone else, as my colleague have mentioned earlier. This reform is very necessary, and actually it's overdue, I would say, because it will only impact those wealthy individual farmers who use it as a loophole to avoid paying tax like anyone else here, unlike anyone else here who have to pay the tax. Once again, the Conservative playing some politics. They're actually prioritizing their own agenda. All of a sudden, they become the championing all issues. And not long time ago, they were very quiet here, supporting the austerity of the Conservative government. So, and I'm really annoyed and sad because they actually give a false hope to residents. They do provide residents with false hope, bring them here over, talking to them as if this motion is going to change everything. In reality, this is a national matter. It's not going to change unless the government at a national level decided to. So there is a misleading here going to our residents, which is I'm very passionate about, and I feel the pain for them, but I'm hoping that this is not going to impact them, providing they don't own farms over £3 million. I'm actually voting against this motion, and I really urge everyone to reject this unfair, impractical motion that was proposed by Conservative today. And I would like to add one thing. I can understand why the Conservative putting forward such a motion, but I'm really disappointed and surprised to see my colleagues on this right side of the chamber playing along and supporting a motion like this. I really urge you to look into the details of that and do vote against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I could have sworn I'd stuck my hand up pretty quickly at the beginning, but I've recently turned 30, so now that I'm old, perhaps I've slowed down more than I'd realised. I'll try my best to edit my speech as I go to avoid repeating what others have said. Firstly, it seems as though some of my friends around the chamber may disagree with this, but I'd just like to say how unprofessional, amateurish and frankly disrespectful it appears to both this chamber and members of the public to make alterations to the wording of a motion after the update papers have been published. We here and the public deserve more than a few minutes to assess and digest the wording of its implications, and I'd urge any councillor wishing to bring forward a motion in future to have the wording worked out further in advance. I'd also like to point out a small typo in bullet point 7 under the council believes that section. Disdain with a T instead of with a D. I'm always keen to ensure the criticism of this government is as accurate as possible. I try to be as morally consistent as possible. In a recent council meeting, I spoke against the cut to winter fuel payments because they are a safety net, and I'd rather a few of the wealthiest people got an unnecessary payment if it meant protecting those who need it most. And I believe this inheritance tax change is a similar situation. Whilst there are certainly some exceptionally wealthy people who see investing in farms and farmland as a useful way to avoid tax, small farms and cash-poor farmers make up the majority of the farms in this country. I'm not opposed to adjusting inheritance tax laws to try and close the loophole for avoiding tax, but I think that this Labour government is approaching the situation with a hammer where a scalpel would be more appropriate. Unfortunately, my friends across the chamber didn't give the administration and officers sufficient time to carry out a thorough investigation as to how many farmers within the borough might actually be impacted by these changes. I know that it was one of the things requested in this motion, removed by the aforementioned last-minute changes, but I'm sure many of us would agree that it would be a hugely useful statistic to know before voting on this motion. I believe many of us would like to vote based on protecting our residents rather than on a national issue which may not be particularly relevant to us locally. As I've just said, this is national politics. It might impact people locally, but even so, not every national political issue should have a place in this chamber. We're here to serve local people on local issues, not to act as an arena for the representatives of the two biggest national parties to snipe at each other on their similarly dreadful national records. Once again, my Conservative friends across the chamber are using serious issues from the national level to try and gain local political advantage. It is cynical, but sadly it will probably work. Regardless of whether this motion passes or not, it is meaningless. We cannot effect change at the national level, regardless of the strength of feeling locally. If we could, our housing number would still be 828, our local plan would still be progressing, and our new hospital would have been built by now. Whether red Tory or blue, the central government are unparalleled experts in their ability to ignore local authorities. I will be abstaining on this vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Isaac.
Mr. Mayor, I speak as a councillor representing a rural ward in the borough. The inheritance tax changes that the Labour government are planning to impose on farmers and small family businesses generally are clearly mistaken and based on inadequate analysis of the likely effects. Ill thought through, as Councillor Slimin so correctly put it. It's time for government to admit it's got it wrong. Mistakes happen, as we all know. And to demonstrate it is listening, and by such can show some humility, and I would suggest strength. They'll be respected. We heard from the Labour side this evening, and it's all going rather well, isn't it, after 5 months? And nothing to worry about for the farmers, and these tax changes will not have any effect on family farmers. But I know farmers locally and I respect them and I understand how deeply concerned they are about this and how angry they are about this. And so I think that it's right that it is a local issue and that it's one that we as councillors in Basingstoke and Dean should take to government. I do believe in a democratic society that we have the opportunity to influence those in government. I think they've made a mistake, and I think if enough councils do this across the land, then perhaps over the Christmas period, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the Secretary of State might reflect on this policy, because fundamentally it's targeted at large commercial enterprises, and it does seem to me that it wouldn't take a lot for the government to make some changes so that they would achieve their objectives, but sparing the small farmers in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I actually put my hand up on a kind of emotional outburst. I was so frustrated with this chamber. If I can't go against the motion, we're going to write a letter and agree, because most of the other points now is what I naturally will do as a councillor. I will engage with farmers if they come to me. We will do these things. So I can't really go against the motion. What I do find is it's a very lazy motion. Like, what are the outcomes of this motion? Where's the time spent actually coming up with something that will actually make a difference for the farmers that have come here? I don't see it. It's just, I mean, you changed it last minute. It just made me really angry that everyone is standing up and playing national politics. We're a borough council. Can we please start to act like a borough council and do the things that the borough council actually have an effect on? This is an important issue, so I'm not saying that we shouldn't take it. I will go back as a Lib Dem councillor and I will speak to my community, and we will come up with a response. But I'm not going to stand here having a go at other parties and spending hours, wasting hours of council time that should be talking about local borough council stuff that actually has an effect. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've enjoyed the debate, actually. I started off, I had this written down earlier, wrong chamber, wrong motion. I've enjoyed the debate. Thank you to Councillor Perry for bringing very human stories to the debate. Thank you to Councillor Lee for bringing some data to the debate. And thank you to Councillor Isaac and Councillor Miller for their contributions as well. Everyone, I think it's been a good debate. I still think, I agree with Councillor Howard Sorrell, that this is trying to shoehorn national politics into a local chamber. But clearly, there are a lot of complex issues across the farming industry, and IHT is only one of them. And it's become a bit of a lightning rod for many of these other issues, I think. I have, I think, almost uniquely in the chamber, no farming experience. I did keep chickens. The last one died last week. But I do have quite a lot of tax experience. So I've written you, if you bear with me, Mr. Mayor, I have written a little tax joke, and it is Christmas. It is a tax joke, but the numbers are real. An Englishman, a Northern Irishman, and a Scotsman walk into a bar in Basingstoke. Unfortunately, they get into a disagreement. They get into a fight, and tragically, they all die. Each left £10 million. The Irishman left hard cash. He had no land or titles and no special tax exemptions, just the nil rate ban. So his family pay £3.9 million of inheritance tax due just 6 months after he died. The Scotsman was a farmer, and he had some land, and it was passed down by his father. So he got the nil rate ban, but he also benefited from some agricultural and business property reliefs, and it turned out they were worth millions. His beneficiaries had to pay £1.7 million of inheritance tax, less than half the Irishman, and they were given 10 years to pay. And on top of that, they were allowed to do that interest-free over 10 years. Finally, the Englishman. Now, the Englishman was a special case. He had a lot of land and titles. They were handed down through the generations. Much was looted from the Anglo-Saxons by his Norman ancestors and was then topped up by what they took from the church during the Reformation. You probably guessed it, he was the king. I lied. He actually has £15.2 billion in assets, and he benefited from a special tax relief. So special, it has its own name, and it's called entrenched privilege. And it means that his heir pays absolutely nothing. I'm sorry, but that's about as ironic as it gets in tax, unless you're Nadeem Zahawi, of course. Joking aside, the reasons for this exemption are set out in a government memorandum of understanding on royal taxation, and it was published by HM Treasury just last July. The paper sets out the reasons for not taxing assets passing to the next sovereign, and I quote directly from the memorandum, quote, that the monarchy as an institution needs sufficient private resources to enable it to continue to perform its traditional role in national life. I'll leave you to reflect on the arguments advanced for farmers this evening about being able to pass a farm to the next generation, to continue to perform a traditional role in national life. Happy Christmas.
Councillor Minnesbaum, sum up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where to start as far as summing up? I think I want to be really clear, actually, and I've heard lots of humour. Thank you, Paul. I've heard impassioned debates trying to represent different parties. I've heard people trying to say why this shouldn't be debated in this chamber, but let's be really clear. I don't think there is anything in this chamber that we discuss that isn't impacted on by local government and national government and national policies. But actually, I'd also like to just speak on behalf of the farmers that were outside tonight. I'd like to thank our colleagues who went to speak to them, because I think that should be our evidence about whether it has an impact locally. And they told us overwhelmingly that it did. Why did I ask for the last point to be changed and talk about a rural policy? Do you know why? Because the voices that I heard said they didn't hear their concerns as far as rural farmers and members of rural communities reflected, and they didn't see their voices on whatever our policies are. That is a very hard lesson that I have had to learn from opposition, and I have heard it loud and clear. So, let us show that we would like to reflect their voices. We have heard their concerns. Let's make sure that we show that we care. And why is it disproportionate? Because disproportionately, they look after an enormous amount of our borough. And they do all the things that we ask of them about economics, about communities, about the environment. So please show that we are prepared to stand with them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Minnesbaum. Now we will take a vote. It will be electronic vote, please.
Just need to say two haven't voted.
The two people who haven't voted, would they like to vote? Motion is carried. we have question from members of the council on notice. We have 6 questions from members of the council this evening. Please, could I ask that you keep your questions and responses concise and within the time limit. I would take each question in turn. I'll tell you that there is 2 minutes for an answer, 1 minute for a supplementary question, 1 minute for supplementary answer, and a maximum of 40 minutes for the total of 4 questions. I think it is quite clear now, everybody. So I would ask, the first question is from Councillor Isaac. And please, can I ask that not to read out and just to say whether as it is on the order paper. Thank you.
I'll do my best. It's to Councillor Kevin James. Our 22-23 accounts have been disclaimed by our auditors, Ernst & Young. That's a serious matter because it typically means that they can't give an opinion on our financial statements due to lack of sufficient evidence. It's through no fault of our financial team, and it's down effectively, as I understand it, to the lack of staff resources that EY had at the time. So my question is, does he join me in sharing my concern about the way we've been failed by EY, and while we should have every confidence in our Chief Financial Officer's calculations, it is a problem that these, because they're not audited, these accounts are going to pass through, and any problems will pass through into future years.
Thank you. Councillor Gavin James.
Yes, I absolutely do share his view. It's not necessarily Ernst & Young's sole issue here. It's a national issue, as you'll be aware. I think we're getting close to 1,000 unaudited accounts now from local authorities. The problem started in 2014. You'll all remember the bonfire of the Quangos, and the Audit Commission was one of those Quangos that Eric Pickles got rid of. It was replaced by 7 bodies working together and us commissioning our own from the private sector to do our audits. That didn't work because it didn't have the resources. The government did have a Kingsman review that suggested doing something else. They didn't like the Kingsman review's proposal, so they then commissioned another review which proposed OLAR. They didn't like that either, so they went away and thought about it, came back and said they'd do ARGA with a bit of OLAR underneath it. Then the minister changed, then Kemi Badenoch announced it was definitely going to be done. It was going to go into the King's speech by then. Unfortunately, Rishi Sunak decided to get rid of ARGA because it was going to impact on business, and he wanted to concentrate on economic growth, which meant the local government bit disappeared as well. And so nothing actually happened until the emergency procedures introduced in February 2024 by the last Conservative government, which would mean that there's this backstop where everything just gets killed off on the 30th of September and never gets audited. And then, of course, we can't ever really audit anything again, because how do you audit something when you've no confidence in the opening balance, because the last lot of accounts weren't audited? So it's going to be an ongoing problem that's going to carry on for a while. The good news is that yesterday the government did issue a new consultation paper on their new regime for audit and governance for local authorities. It was really helpful because, of course, the entire finance world was looking at the local government finance settlement, but exactly at the same time they issued that new consultation, which runs until the 29th of January. So we've got 5 weeks in which 2 most councillors closed to comment on their new proposals, which is for a local audit office, because they didn't want to adopt the government's idea of a Office of Local Audit and decided to have a local audit. There you go. Read the consultation, great Christmas reading. You can get a hard copy, and if you haven't bought anything for Councillor Basham yet, I suggest that is the thing he'd most want. But yes, I am equally frustrated. It's a serious matter.
Supplementary?
Yes, it does get worse, though, as he will be aware, is because the way that auditors are procured centrally, we've paid EY the full amount, over £50,000, for work that they haven't done. So can he give me some assurance that he will get as much of our money back for residents as possible?
If it's possible, we'll get the money back. We shouldn't be paying for something we haven't got, but I think that's not the worst problem. The worst problem could come if you imagine that the government suddenly had this idea of merging loads of local authorities together when there's lots of them, and I'm not saying Rushmore, haven't had their accounts audited for 3 years and have significant financial problems, because all those problems will be wrapped into one authority and will never work out what the hell happened. But surely they're not going to do that, are they? Oh, they are. All right.
Thank you. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As per the order paper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question. We've been talking a lot about economics this evening. I remember being taught in my A-level economics classes about supply and demand. It was a long time ago, Mr. Mayor, but I do remember the basic principle, which is if you increase supply, prices should fall. So I can see where Councillor McCormack is going with this particular question. In theory, if we allocate more land for houses in the local plan, that should lead to more houses being built, so greater housing land supply, and therefore lower house prices. However, as we all know, theory doesn't always translate into reality, particularly when we come to talking about the housing market. Allocating more land for houses in a local plan doesn't necessarily lead to more houses being built. It might lead to more planning consents, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the houses will be delivered when we need them to. In fact, developers have a very strong financial incentive not to build out all of their planning consents. If they were to do that, we would see housing supply increase, prices fall. Great news for our residents, but not particularly good news for the developers' profit margins. So many developers will sit on housing consents, sometimes for years, in order to maintain their profits. That's why we have nearly 7,000 outstanding planning consents in our borough at the moment. So I'd argue that improving housing affordability isn't about allocating more land to homes in our local plan. It's about getting developers building by incentivising them to get out there rather than to hold on to land and restrict supply. Even the government acknowledged this in its announcement last week, although we've yet to see how effective its proposals will be. It's also about local authorities taking a lead role in house building in their borough, which is exactly what we're now doing with Many Down, and also through the work that our officers are undertaking to look at potential development opportunities on land that we own. It's about working with social housing providers to encourage them to invest in new homes, lobbying government to ensure that grant funding continues to be available to make housing affordable, and also pushing developers to deliver according to our local plan. Thank you.
Supplementary, Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, the answer, as I understand it, is basically that he wants the government to accelerate house building, but he doesn't see any role for the council in that. We have sat on a load of land, and we've just passed a motion tonight that is in favour of land banking. So my supplemental question is this. What means does the portfolio see that we can accelerate house building locally, given that we have taken 28 years to bring Many Down forward, and we've got a number of other MDAs in the pipeline that may take just as long?
Councillor Konecko.
Yeah. Well, I think I've already outlined a lot of the initiatives that we are undertaking as the Borough Council in order to make sure that these the homes that we need are delivered, but in a sustainable way, with the right infrastructure in place, with the right supporting facilities, and to make sure that we deliver homes that are generally sustainable from an environmental perspective. We want the right homes in the right places with the right supporting infrastructure. That's the basis of our local plan, and that will be the basis of the local plan that we continue to draft in response to the new NPPF.
Thank you. Councillor Minnes-Brown to Councillor Harvey.
As the paper, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank the leader already for his engagement.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mansman, for your question. The government have announced their intention to proceed with devolution and local government reorganisation. The small print of their proposals is important, and so we've begun work through the considerable detail to understand and be in a better position to discuss the implications. It's just 72 hours since they published the white paper, so before we set any debate going amongst ourselves or our communities, it is best that we have an informed understanding. There are a series of questions that government need to answer about their proposals, questions that reflect our concerns, and also to provide clarity on a number of key points. Questions that are being raised by the District Councils Network, questions that are being raised by the County Councils Network, questions that are being raised by our neighbouring councils. But there are a couple of really important things I want to say tonight. Let's be absolutely clear. Basingstoke-and-Deane is a successful borough council, and we have a duty to continue to deliver the very best services for our residents and the focus on their needs and their priorities. Nothing should divert us from that focus. So I want to say that we are absolutely concentrated on the work and projects that will make a difference to our residents' lives. Let's also be absolutely clear, and I hope we all share this principle. We are here to represent the interests of all our residents and businesses in Basingstoke-and-Deane, and they are our priority. They do say things usually come in threes. So we've had the MPPF reform, we've got a devolution white paper, and now we've got the local government financial settlement, all just before Christmas. Let's take stock. Let's be clear in our purpose and approach, and then ensure we move forward informed and primed to advocate for our community's best interests. There are some fundamental points that we need to explore together. Group leaders is where this can begin, this conversation, and it has already done so. And groups, I know, and officers will support groups in having briefings to make sure we are thoroughly informed so the debate can then proceed.
Supplementary, Councillor Minnis-Brown.
Only, Mr. Mayor, that I hope the leader understands that he has my full support.
I hope we have the support of the full chamber because we're going to need it during this process.
Councillor Dillot to Councillor James.
Thank you, Mayor. With the pension credit application surging since Rachel from the Chancellor announcement that winter fuel payments would be means tested, and given that pension credit unlocks additional benefits like free TV licences and NHS support, what steps is the Council taking to raise awareness and assist residents in applying for pension credit to ensure they access this crucial support?
Yes, thank you for that question. Based on the motion from last time, the Council has been active in making sure that all residents who might be entitled to pension credit do have take a look at that. Our benefits team have been working, obviously. Pension credit itself is dealt with by the DWP. We don't have the data and information. However, where we know people are getting housing benefit or council tax benefits, we are writing to them and making sure they're aware of pension credit and to check their entitlement to it. We've also changed our template letters we send out to working age people, recognising that working age people do eventually retire, and some of them might be close to retirement and need to get that claim in straight away to benefit as soon as possible from it. And any customers who come into the council offices and talk to the benefits team, again, there's a bit of a visual assessment of their age, and obviously we're having that conversation with them as well. In addition, our green team have also picked up the work, as they've been going around doing home visits on people. Anyone they visit, they talk about pension credit to make sure they're fully aware of it as well. And so that's been, and it's also been on the screens in reception. We've also been busy putting it out on Facebook and a thing called X, which I didn't think ran anymore, but apparently it does. So we've sent that out, and we're busy re-Xing, if you can't read, I don't know what we're doing, but we're doing stuff online to push out stuff to people who are virtual. So we're doing all we possibly can with the resources we've got to make sure everyone's aware, and I encourage councillors to, when they go and do their casework, to also ask that question, speak to the resident and see if they're entitled or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's just a quick one. Considering obviously the 21st December deadline for pension credit applications to be eligible for backdated payments, which obviously includes the winter fuel payment, what measures are the council implementing to promote the cost of living assistance fund, focusing on those that live in fuel poverty but can't claim pension credit? And how long is the backlog of applications?
No, in terms of the backlog for the DWP, I don't know. COLAF, we are behind because the problem with COLAF is we don't put any resources into it because we weren't expecting to run it until an amendment that comes into council. So there are some going through. I haven't had an updated figure yet. We were running to the point where we were going to have to close COLAF because I think we had enough backlog to say we couldn't accept any more referrals into it because we might run out of money in that scheme. But I'll get a written answer and update you as soon as I can.
Councillor Isaac to Councillor Konietzko.
Yes. How confident is the portfolio holder that our local plan, which we're having to restart, we're obliged to restart, will be completed before any local government reorganisation takes effect?
Thank you very much for that question. I'll get my crystal ball out. Joking aside, I'm sure that everybody in this chamber would agree that the efforts made by our officers, fellow councillors, town and parish councils and local residents in helping us to update our local plan so far and helping to shape the future of our borough are worthwhile, both now and in the future, and that will remain the case regardless of what happens with local government reorganisation. We have a duty to think carefully about the places that we're creating, and I know that as a collective we take that duty very seriously and are doing what we can with it. However, I understand the concern that is being raised by the questions. Let me do my best to answer it. I can't tell you when we are likely to be directly affected by local government reform here in Basingstoke and Deane. As you know, the government announced its English devolution white paper earlier this week, and we're still waiting for a lot of the detail to become available, and then we actually have to process all of that information. As far as I can see, the government hasn't provided any detailed timelines on when it expects this reorganisation to happen. The white paper simply states that the government will deliver an ambitious first wave of reorganisation in this Parliament. So I think we can all make a guess as to what that's likely to mean. We have had, thankfully, a few more days to at least examine the new MPPF, and I can give you a bit more detail about the timelines for that. The new MPPF sets us a deadline of December 2026, so 2 years from now, by which we need to submit our local plan for examination. But we want to move quickly, more quickly than that. The government has removed the protection, as we all know, that we had from unwanted speculative development by taking away the 4-year housing land supply threshold. So this administration's perspective is that the sooner we can move to finalise the plan, the better. We're working on a detailed timetable at the moment. Officers will be working hard over the coming weeks and days to finalise that, and I hope to be able to share more information on that timeline, as it's something that we do control in the next few weeks.
Councillor. Supplementary.
Crystal ball time again, I'm afraid. Is he worried that as a result of local government reorganisation, this borough may be allocated even more housing from other areas?
I am very worried by local government reorganisation in general.
Councillor Dillo to Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the deal now signed to progress the Mellydown development, can the council provide an update on the status of plans to designate Old Down Woodland Park as a local nature reserve, confirming that it is on an LNR priority list, ensuring its long-term protection and enhancement? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank Councillor Dello for his question. I also thank him for entering into the spirit of Christmas, delivering repeats and old chestnuts. Now, I recall this was last raised in July 2023, and the position has not changed. Old Down is a cherished area that our officer teams and volunteer groups are enthusiastically maintaining for both its biodiversity and public recreation use. Old Down is a site of importance for nature conservation, a SINC. It's designated for its important chalk, grassland, butterfly interest and community value. SINCs are locally designated and have no legal protection. However, they are designated for the presence of important priority habitats covered by the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006, that's NERC, I shall refer to it again, which also covers protected and notable species, but sometimes geological or community importance. These areas are protected from impacts of development as a matter of policy under the Council's local plan, and SINCs within the Council's ownership in our control are also protected under the Council's legal obligation to protect and enhance biodiversity, again under NERC. The Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre, HBIC, manages the Hampshire SINC system on behalf of the local planning authorities. SINCs are ultimately the responsibility of the local authority. We have 800 in our borough. Any proposal for a SINC deletion or a major change are put forward to the annual SINC advisory panel for consideration. So I must emphasise that regardless of which designation it has, LNR or SINC, as a public body we have to protect the habitat and the species it supports due to the legal duty placed on us by NERC and the Environment Act of 2021 to conserve and enhance the biodiversity. The external validation of a sink gives it additional significance to an LNR, which is only declared by us, the local authority. Old Down has got nothing at all to do with the Many Down North development. It could be possibly linked to Many Down South. That was brought to EPH on 3rd of March. So hopefully you will see that we are fully committed to making sure that Old Down continues to thrive. Thank you.
Councillor Dillo, supplementary? No. Okay. Now we come question to the Chair of Cabinet and or a committee. Are there any questions to the Chair of Cabinet or committees in respect of the minutes listed? It have to relate to the minutes, and I would really like to, so Councillor Dillo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, as you know, I've campaigned tirelessly to support the ice rink community. I'm pleased to announce tonight that Nice Leisure and Standard Securities have now completed the transaction on the lease agreement for the ice rink. This will secure and keep ice in Basingstoke. My question to the committee chair is whether Planet Ice have been invited, as requested, to come to the committee to give councillors an update.
That relate to any chairman?
Resident Services.
Councillor Testain.
I'll have to get back to you in writing on that one. We haven't invited them as yet, but I'll talk to the relevant portfolio holder.
Councillor Vo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question on Resident Services Committee meeting held on the 13th of November, minute 2024. The annual review of housing allocation scheme. It might be better if the portfolio holder for resident services answers rather than the chair, but I'll leave it to you. But at the Resident Services Committee meeting, members had an in-depth discussion about how applicants are prioritised as part of our housing allocation scheme. While our armed forces veterans are given priority, only veterans with an urgent housing need are placed in Band 1. Our highest priority banding. An urgent housing need, we learnt at the committee, is a very high bar, including risks of fatal harm or a life-threatening condition directly linked to their unsuitable housing. Otherwise, our veterans are placed in Band 2. Now, yesterday, the government announced updated statutory guidance to improve access to social housing for members of the armed forces. Will this guidance change how veterans and members of the armed forces are assessed for priority housing in our borough? Thank you.
Councillor Testain.
I'll ask the portfolio holder if she knows, and if not, we'll have to discuss.
Councillor Harvey can answer as the chair of the cabinet.
If he wishes.
If he wishes.
We will happily provide a written response.
Councillor Vo, are you satisfied with that? Thank you. Christmas, and I'd like to invite you all to join me in the parlor for a Christmas drink. Thank you.